The young officer tightened his grip on his belt as the wind cut through the open doors of the station. The crowd around him moved in restless waves, voices blending into a low, constant hum that filled the air like the pulse of a machine he had been on duty for 12 hours straight, and every sound seemed sharper, every movement suspicious. His eyes darted from one face to another, searching for something that made sense among the chaos of travelers and strangers, and the endless shuffle of feet. He saw the elderly man again, the one who had stepped past the yellow line and into the restricted area. The man moved slowly, his head bowed, his coat flapping slightly with each uneven step, as if the weight of the years pressed against him. The officer raised his voice, calling out for the man to stop, but the words were lost in the noise, swallowed by the rumble of a passing train. He tried again, louder this time, his throat dry, his patience thinning. He felt the familiar surge of authority, the kind that had been drilled into him during training. The instinct to command, to control, to act before hesitation could take hold. The old man still did not turn, his pace steady, but aimless, his shoes scuffing against the concrete floor, leaving faint marks like shadows that could not be erased. The officer began to move faster, his boots striking the ground in measured rhythm, his pulse quickening with each step. He could feel the eyes of a few onlookers following him, curious perhaps, even judging. He ignored them. His focus locked on the frail figure ahead. He reached for his radio, muttering a brief report. But static filled his ear and he switched it off. Annoyed, it was just an old man, probably lost or confused. Yet something about the way he moved stirred a quiet unease in the officer's chest, a whisper of doubt that he quickly pushed aside. He had seen enough people feign confusion to avoid rules, to step where they did not belong when told not to. He called again, his voice cutting through the space, sharp and commanding. "Stop right there, sir. This area is restricted." But again there was no response. The old man kept walking until he reached the far edge near the wall where a faded flag hung behind glass, its colors dimmed by time. He paused there, his hand lifting slightly, as if reaching for something unseen. The officer closed the distance between them, now close enough to see the texture of the man's coat. Rough wool frayed at the seams, the faint smell of dust, and something older that clung to him like memory. The officer felt irritation rise again. He stepped forward, blocking the man's path, his voice firmer. "What are you doing here? This is not a public area." The old man turned his head. Slowly his face revealed under the dim light, lined and pale with eyes that seemed to look through rather than at the officer. The silence stretched long enough for the young man to feel his authority waver, a flicker of discomfort beneath his badge. He straightened his back, his hand resting near the edge of his holster, more out of habit than threat. He repeated the question louder this time, but before the old man could answer, a gust of wind blew through the open platform, scattering a few papers across the floor, one of them brushing against the officer's boot. He looked down for a second, then back up, noticing something he had missed before the small case clutched in the man's hand. Leather worn nearly smooth by time, the man's knuckles white from the effort of holding it. The officer's gaze lingered on it, his mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was a weapon, maybe it was contraband, maybe something worse. But there was also something else, something that made him hesitate. It looked personal. Fragile, even the kind of thing someone protects because it is all they have left. The officer told himself to stay sharp, to follow protocol, yet the edge of his tone softened slightly as he spoke. "Sir, you need to step. Back to the main area?" Now the man blinked slowly, as if returning from a faraway thought. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He lowered his gaze to the case and then to the chain that hung from his neck, disappearing beneath his coat. The officer caught a glimpse of metal, dull and faintly glinting in the weak light, but he could not yet see what it was. He felt a strange pull of curiosity mixed with guilt. He had shouted at him as if he were a trespasser or a threat. But now, he was not so. Sure, the noise of the station seemed to fade, the voices and the footsteps dissolving into a low hum in the background as the two stood there a few feet apart, one filled with years and the other with orders and rules. The officer thought of his father. For a moment, a man who used to talk about service and honor. But those stories had always felt distant now, standing before this stranger. He felt them echo back faintly, as if whispered from another time. The old man finally looked up and spoke, his voice thin but steady. I just needed a moment, that was all his words, almost lost in the noise, yet carrying a weight that made the officer pause. He wanted to ask what moment, what was in the case, why he had come here, but something in the man's eyes stopped him. It was not defiance or fear. It was remembrance, deep and unshakable, like a shadow that could not be lifted. He glanced again at the chain, wondering what hung from it and why it felt so important, his mind telling him to enforce the rule, his heart whispering to wait just a little longer. He could feel both instincts colliding inside him, the air thick with something unspoken. He took a slow step closer, his voice quieter now, less like an order, more like a question. "Are you all right, sir?" The old man nodded slightly but did not move, his gaze fixed on the flag behind the glass, his lips forming silent words that the officer could not hear. The young man followed his eyes, seeing only fabric and faded color. But, sensing that for the stranger, it meant far more than that, he did not understand it yet. But he would soon. The officer shifted his weight, uncertain. For the first time in a long while, he felt the boundaries of his duty blur with something human, something that made the rules feel smaller. The moment stretched long and quiet between them, until the old man's hand trembled slightly, and the case slipped just enough for the chain around his neck to shift, revealing what hung there. The officer caught the faint reflection of metal near the man's chest, but the sight was still obscured. His breath caught without reason. His body tensed as if some unseen truth hovered just out of reach. The young officer stood frozen as the faint glint of metal caught the dim light around them, his breath shallow, his mind flickering through fragments of training rules and instinct. Yet none of them prepared him for the quiet weight of the moment before him. The old man's hand trembled the chain, shifting once more, revealing the shape of the metal, dull with years yet unmistakable. It was not merely a decoration, it was a symbol etched into history, worn only by those who had given more than most could imagine. The officer recognized it, though. He had never seen one up close. He had learned about them in the academy during a brief lecture that had meant little to him. Then, a distant story of courage belonging to another generation. Now it gleamed faintly before him, and his chest tightened with something he could not name. He swallowed hard, his voice catching in his throat as he spoke softer now, as though sound itself might shatter the fragile air between them. "Sir, is that what I think it is?" The old man did not answer, his gaze still. Fixed on the flag behind the glass, his eyes misted not from weakness, but from memory, the kind that never fades, only deepens. The officer felt the urge to step back to give the man space, yet his feet would not move, as though anchored by something. Unseen, the noise of the station had faded into a low murmur, distant and irrelevant in that small corner of stillness. He could hear the slow rhythm of the old man's breath and the faint clink of metal as the chain swayed gently with the rise and fall of his chest. The officer thought of all the times he had raised his voice without thinking of the weight his words carried, all the moments when he had believed authority meant control rather than understanding. He felt the echo of his own shout moments earlier, and it filled him with quiet shame. He had seen a stranger and assumed he was a problem to be solved, not a person to be heard now. He saw not just a man, but a lifetime. A history etched in quiet lines, and a metal that spoke, louder than words ever could. The old man turned at last, his eyes meeting the officer's, and in that single glance the young man saw more than explanation. He saw battlefields long silenced and faces long gone. He saw nights filled with fear and mornings filled with loss. He saw loyalty and pain and courage woven together in a way his generation could only read about. The man's lips moved slowly as if pulling words from far away. "I fought under that flag." He said, his voice so soft the officer had to lean closer to hear I lost friends there. Brothers who never came home. I come here once a year to remember them to stand where they would have stood if they had lived. The officer said nothing. The words pressed against his chest. Too heavy to speak. He looked again at the medal. Its surface scratched, its ribbon frayed, but its meaning untouched. He had seen officers pin medals on one another during ceremonies, clean and rehearsed moments, filled with applause and speeches. But this was different. This was real, raw, and unpolished. It was the kind of honor that lived quietly in the heart of those who carried it and died with them. When the world forgot their names, the officer felt small beside it. Small but also connected, as though some invisible thread bound them across time and duty. The old man's hand shook slightly as he lifted the medal from his chest, letting it rest in his palm. He looked down at it with a faint smile that held both sorrow and pride. "This," he whispered, "is all that's left. They gave it to me, but I wear it for the ones who never had the chance." His fingers closed around it as if protecting something fragile. The officer wanted to say something, anything, but no words felt right. Instead, he took a slow step closer, his posture shifting not as an enforcer of rules, but as a man standing before another man. A train passed on the track behind them, the vibration rattling through the floor, but neither of them moved. The old man's gaze drifted toward the window. Again, his voice lower now, almost lost in the noise. "I used to come here with my wife. She waited for me on this platform when I came home the first time. She's gone now, but I still hear her voice when the trains come in. She used to say that every arrival was proof of hope, that someone always comes back." The officer felt a tightness in his chest, a sudden understanding of why the old man had crossed the line. Why this place mattered. He looked around at the signs, the barriers, the bright warnings that shouted where people could and could not stand, and they all seemed meaningless for a moment. Compared to the quiet truth before him, the old man had not broken rules out of carelessness, but out of devotion, a need to touch a place that still held the echo of those he had lost. The young officer lowered his head slightly, a gesture of respect that came naturally without command. The old man noticed and gave a faint nod, his expression soft but tired, as though memory itself weighed on. A security announcement echoed through the speakers, the words cold and procedural. The officer knew he should escort the man back to the main area, report the incident, and write a statement. But the idea of doing that now felt wrong. It felt like disrespect to something greater than procedure. He hesitated, his mind racing through what his supervisor would say, what the report would require, but his heart answered quietly and firmly. Not this time, not for this man. He looked at the old man and said softly, "You can stay here a few minutes, sir. Take your time." The old man looked surprised for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice rough but warm. The officer stood beside him, not speaking, just watching as the old man reached out his hand and pressed it gently against the glass where the flag hung. His fingers trembled slightly, but his touch was steady. His eyes closed, and for a long moment he was elsewhere, standing among the ghosts of comrades who had never made it home. The officer imagined them too faceless but present, a silent company bound by the same oath he had taken but lived in a different world, one built from courage and loss. As the moments passed, the officer found himself thinking of his own life, the reasons he had joined the force, the dreams he once had of making a difference, of helping people. He realized how easy it was to forget that behind every uniform, every face, every order, there was a story hidden beneath layers of time and duty. He wondered how many times he had shouted at someone who only needed a moment of understanding. How many times he had walked past history disguised as a stranger. The old man turned after a while, his eyes clearer now, as if the weight he carried had lifted just slightly. He said, I didn't mean to cause trouble, son. I just needed to stand here one more time." The officer shook his head gently. "No trouble at all, sir. I understand now." The old man smiled again, a faint, tired smile, and began to fasten the chain around his neck, the metal resting once more against his chest. The officer watched the simple motion, feeling that he was witnessing something sacred, something far beyond his authority. As the old man straightened his coat, he stumbled slightly, and the officer reached out quickly, catching his arm, steadying him. The contact, brief but grounding, the old man patted his hand in silent thanks, then looked up at him and said, "You wear that badge proud, but never forget, it's not the badge that gives you honor, it's what you do while wearing it." The words sank deep into the officer's heart, heavier than any reprimand or praise he had ever received. He nodded, unable to speak. They stood together in silence as another train rolled in its doors, sliding open with a hiss, a crowd spilling onto the platform, the moment breaking, yet lingering like a ghost. The officer finally stepped back, giving the old man space to move. When he was ready, the man nodded once more, then began to walk slowly toward the exit. His steps careful but sure, the officer watched him until he disappeared into the crowd, then turned his gaze back to the flag behind the glass. The colors faded, but alive in a way he had never noticed before. Stood there for a long time, thinking of the mettle of the man of the shout that had started it all and how quickly judgment could turn into understanding. He felt the hum of the station return, the noise, the motion, the routine, but something inside him had shifted subtly, irrevocably. He reached up, touched the badge on his chest, and for the first time he truly felt the weight of what it meant. The officer remained standing near the flag long after the old man had gone, his reflection faint in, the glass merging with the faded colors behind it. He felt the cold air drifting through the open platform, but it no longer carried the same edge. It was softer, almost thoughtful. He watched people pass by, unaware of what had just happened around them. Their faces tired, distracted, some laughing, some silent, all moving through their own small worlds. He wondered how many stories brushed past him each day, unnoticed, how many memories hidden behind ordinary faces he had ignored while focusing only on the surface of things. He finally turned away, the echo of the old man's words still hanging in his mind. Not the badge that gives you honor, but what you do while wearing it. The sentence repeated itself quietly within him as he walked back. Toward his post, he looked at his fellow officers talking near the entrance, their laughter, casual, easy. He thought of telling them what had happened, but stopped himself. Somehow it felt wrong to share it, as if the moment belonged only to him and the man who had carried the medal. It was not a story for retelling, it was something meant to live quietly in memory. The shift dragged on as the hours slipped by, but his thoughts stayed fixed on that encounter. Each time a train pulled in, he caught himself glancing toward the crowd, half expecting to see the old man again, moving slowly with that same calm defiance. The platform felt different now, less like a place of order, more like a place filled with echoes. Every sound, every movement seemed connected to something deeper he could not quite name. When his shift ended, he stepped outside into the chill night air. The city lights stretched in all directions, shimmering in puddles left by earlier rain. He loosened his collar and walked without destination, the streets emptying as midnight approached. He passed closed shops, flickering signs, the distant hum of traffic, a world moving forward endlessly. Yet he felt himself standing still somewhere between past and present. He thought of the flag behind the glass, of the hand that had touched it, of the medal resting against a chest that had known both pride and sorrow. He imagined the old man back home, maybe sitting alone, maybe asleep with the medal still close by, and he felt a strange urge to see him again. The next day, the officer returned to the station earlier than his shift began, the morning light pale through the high windows. He checked the schedule, scanned the benches and the corners, but the old man was not there still. He found himself standing by the same spot near the flag. He stared at it again, but this time he noticed the small plaque beneath it. Words he had never bothered to read before it listed names worn nearly invisible by age and time. He realized one of them might have belonged to the people the old man spoke of, the brothers who never came home. He ran his fingers over the carved letters, feeling the roughness against his skin, and wondered what it must be like to live with so many ghosts, and still find strength to visit them year after year. Later that week, a letter arrived at the station addressed to the department. No return name, just careful handwriting. Inside was a small folded note and a medal, the same one he had seen that day. The note read simply, "For the young officer who still listens." The officer stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to feel honored or broken. He felt his throat tighten as he held the medal in his hand, heavier now. Not because of its metal, but because of what it carried. He read the note again and again until the words blurred into meaning beyond language. He found the courage to ask around the nearby shelters and veteran centers to see if anyone knew the old man, but no one did. Some remembered. Someone like him. Someone who visited the station each year, but no one knew his name. It was as if he had existed only in that moment between the trains. The officer realized then that perhaps it did not matter whether he found him, the meaning had already been passed on quietly without ceremony. He went back to the station and approached his supervisor, explaining that he wanted to display the medal beside the flag, not as property of the department, but as a reminder of respect. The supervisor hesitated but finally agreed, saying only, "Make sure people know what it stands for." The officer placed the medal beneath the glass next to the flag on a small mount, barely noticeable to those who did not look closely, but for those who did it carried weight. He wrote nothing on the plaque. No new inscription, just the silent presence of something earned and remembered. After that day, he never raised his voice the same way again. When he saw confusion or hesitation in the eyes of others, he paused. First listened. First the memory of the old man guiding him quietly from within. Years passed. The station. Changed faces. Changed uniforms, changed, but the flag and the medal remained side by side, gathering dust yet never.